Asha's intro to that song reminded me of a line I heard that goes, "If you ever want to hear God laugh, just tell him your plans." Yeah, right. I like that. So, welcome for the second in our series of dealing with challenge and difficulty. First thing I'd like to do is our reading today was taken from this book, which I really recommend. It's from Sister Joan Chittister. It's called Called to Question. And it's a spiritual journey. It's just a wonderful book, and I'm going to be giving some quotes from it and some thoughts from it, but I really recommend it. As you can tell, because I've had it for a year now, and I haven't given it back. And I have a lot of little tabs in it, so I really do like this book. But Chris, you can pick it up after the sermon.
I had to take my tabs out before I gave it.
Oh, okay. Well, fair enough. So anyway, Sister Joan tells the story of a seeker who once asked an elderly monk, "What is it you do in your monastery?" And the old man took a minute and he said, "Well, we fall and we get up, we fall and we get up, and we fall and we get up again." And that's what they did in their monastery. Do you ever feel like your life is like that? Just a kind of progression of falling and getting up. I like Asha's image, you know, here's my plan and here's my life. That's kind of what it is. It's side to side. We fall and we get up, we fall and we get up. She identifies it as the path between faith and despair. She describes it as how our spiritual journeys progress. And I think she's right. It's kind of like dancing. Do you ever take ballroom dancing? It's kind of like dancing the foxtrot. You know, you take 2 steps back and 1 step forward the other way around. But we fall and we get up. Part of the reason that we fall and we get up and we continue to fall is, I think part of it is the way we're wired. We are wired to fixate on bad news. And I was doing some research on this, as you know that I do. And science tells us that our brains have a built-in bias toward negativity. I'm sure you knew this because I think I've mentioned it before. For thousands of years, that's what kept us alive. I mean, if we had, I don't know, a saber-toothed tiger running at us or something terrible about to happen, we had to pay more attention to it than we did if something pleasurable was happening. I mean, the sun on our face is lovely, but it doesn't require us to run 400 yards really fast. So we have a built-in bias for what will hurt us, or else back then we would have been lunch. However, we have to ask ourselves, how helpful is that to us now, especially when we're not on 285? It may be wildly useful when we're on 400, but absent that, how much use is it to us now? We don't have wild animals chasing us. We don't have moments where we have to physically respond, or else we're going to be in great physical danger too much. But it doesn't matter because we still are triggered by life's stressors anyway. And what this means is we notice them more than we notice pleasurable events. We fixate on them more. We Velcro them to us more. And I just love this image of Teflon and Velcro. I've now told you pretty much everything I know about cooking. But, you know, Teflon people are people who let things slide off them like eggs in a pan. Teflon does not offer a lot of resistance. It has what we used to call, I think, a low coefficient of friction. Either that or a high coefficient of friction. I'm not sure which one it is. But I think Renee would probably know. But it's low. It's a low coefficient. Thank you to the engineer in the room. But our negativity bias shows up in a lot of ways. In a relationship, it typically takes 5 good interactions to make up for a single bad one. Do you notice that? Yeah. I mean, you can have 5 good interactions. You know, it's great to see you. You did a wonderful thing. You're the best at blah, blah, blah. To make up for one, you really messed that up. It's like, oh my God, you just fixate on it forever. Don't we? That's our bias. I also learned that people will typically work much harder to avoid losing $100 than they will work to earn $100. What is that about? Because we fixate on loss. Painful experiences are much more memorable. They stick with us than pleasurable ones. More neurons fire in our little brains. More neurons fire in response to pain than in response to pleasure. I mean, that's just the way we're built. We are wired to take greater note of pain. So our brains are like Teflon for positive experiences, but like Velcro for negative ones. Now, why does this matter? You can probably see this happening in your own life. Let's take a typical day. You go through a day, you do dozens of things that are wonderful, that are kind, compassionate, giving. What is it you remember when you're going to bed at night? The one thing you did wrong, the one negative thing that somebody said to you, the one slight you think that you got from somebody. That's what we fixate on because that's the way we are built. So this tendency is important to remember as we figure out together how to navigate life challenges. Why? Because we are way more likely to focus on bad stuff. So this is important as we figure out how to deal with and integrate life's negative effects. So for a Teflon person, again, life stresses just slide off. Teflon, I love this. Teflon is a material that offers no resistance. Okay, is there a spiritual message in our pans? Yes, it's a material that offers no resistance. And so things just slide off, things don't stick. It's like those metal roofs. You drive up to North Georgia and you see those metal roofs that are on all those houses up there. Why are those people using metal roofs? It's not just that they all like green. It's because snow and ice slide off them. And if they didn't have that property, that non-skid, that skid property, the weight of the snow and the ice would crush those houses. I think we have another spiritual lesson there. If we don't let this stuff slide off, we get crushed. Just next time you're looking for a spiritual lesson, drive north and look at a roof. It's the same thing. We need to have that ability to let things just go. At the other end of the spectrum, and it is a spectrum, is the Velcro gang. You know who you are. We know who we are. This group is made up of those of us, and I count myself in here sometimes because it's a spectrum, those of us who dwell. We focus on the problems that life has given us. We think they're injustices. We don't let them go. We grip them to us for reasons which escape me, but we do. I do it too. Penn State professor David Almeida says it's these Velcro people who end up suffering health consequences down the road. The negativity that we just refuse to release, it finds refuge in our bodies, and it can end up with stress, with mental issues, with emotional problems. We need to figure out how to build a structure for our lives that lets these things go. What can we do to reduce our resistance, like Teflon, so that these issues can just slide off? All spiritual systems, and when I say spiritual systems, I'm also talking about faith traditions, when you get down to it, are ways for us to rise above what Richard Rohr called stumbling stones in our path. Remember last week we talked about his model of the two halves of life. All faith traditions, spiritual systems, structures that we build are ways for us to rise above these stumbling stones, to make ourselves less resistant so that these stresses of life can fall off us too. They help us remain whole and at peace, just like the deep ocean underneath the waves. We've talked about that image before. Isn't that great? At the top you have all the waves and the turmoil and the choppiness and the toing and froing, and at the bottom it's deep and peaceful and calm. And it's the same ocean. It just depends where you look at it and where you are in it. We make progress in our spiritual journey, not, as Joan Chittister puts it, in terms of advancement, but in terms of depth. We make it in terms of depth. So last week we talked about Father Rohr's notion of the two halves of life, his book, Falling Upward, Spirituality for the Two Halves of Life. And there, just summary, he found it helpful to draw a distinction between our younger spiritual years, when we built the container that enabled us to develop the deep wisdom that would give us peace later on. We create the structure that later on we can fill with life's experiences, life's wisdom, life's awakenings that enrich us in our second half and bring us peace. We need the rules we build in the first half in order to fashion the structure that sustains our growth later on. The challenge is not to remain focused on the container, not to remain focused on the rules that comprise the structure. So Joan Chittister calls this distinction the difference between religion and spirituality. She tells the story of a Sufi master who is dying. So his disciples are gathered around him in great distress, saying, "Master, Master, after you are gone, what will we do?" And he says, "I am only the finger pointing at the moon. When I am gone, maybe you will see the moon." That's the difference between religion religion and spirituality. She writes, "The very purpose of religion is to enable us to step off into the uncharted emptiness that is the spiritual life, freely but not untethered." Remember that, freely but not untethered. We have under our feet the promise of the tradition that formed us and the disciplines that shaped our souls. We can then wander through the pantheon of spiritual traditions freely, going deeper and deeper into every question from every direction. In the end, we become more, not less, of what we ourselves know to be our own religious identity. I love that. The image is that the structures that we have learned sustain us as we create and chart our own religious identity. So what I want to ask us to think about today, and this might be another talk where there's more questions than answers, I'm sorry, I'm just on a roll here, is what is our own structure? Because I invite us to think that we need one. Not necessarily a traditional one, but one that works for us. Let me give you some examples. In Islam, we know that all observant Muslims are called to prayer 5 times a day. Is it because it matters to God? I suggest it's because it matters to them. It gives them the structure to develop their prayer life and their connection with God. Many Catholics and some Protestants pray daily according to the lectionary, which is called the daily office. You will pray 3 or 4 or 5 times a day for that same reason, because it matters to you. It gives you a structure in which you can walk your spiritual path. Other faith traditions, Buddhists will meditate 1 or 2 or more times a day. The Dalai Lama meditates 4 hours a day. Tell me that's not a structure. Hindus will have a shrine in their homes before which they pray daily, in the morning and in the evening. Many of us do that. I have an altar in my office. It's the altar because it's the only place I haven't stacked up papers. I'm like, that's a bad thing. I'll find myself reaching, where do I put this? No, don't put it there. Because I'm just convinced something horrible will happen if I lay a piece of paper on my altar. Because it means something to me. It probably won't. Maybe I'll go home and try it. But it means something to me. It's got the significance of being an anchor to my prayer practice, to my spiritual journey. Other faith traditions incorporate a daily structure to grow in our knowledge that we are always in the presence of God. So what I want to think about today, and invite you to think about today, is what structures have worked for you to help you integrate life's challenges. Not necessarily solve them. I came across a great quote from Carl Jung. He says, "The greatest and most important problems of life are fundamentally unsolvable. They can never be solved, but only outgrown." That really resonated with me. They can only be outgrown. How? By walking through them as we develop our spiritual resilience, as we realize that our connection with God will carry us through. It's not that we can solve these problems like something we got to deal with at work or like a puzzle. They're not solvable. If we are successful, we integrate them. They will always become part of ourselves. For those of you who have had difficulties in life, major traumas, you know that you are different because of it, right? You will not be the same. It doesn't mean that you are desperately unhappy always. It just means that you have integrated it into your experience. I know I have. When my son Nick was so sick several years ago, I'm a different person because of it. I think I'm a better person because of it. Even though I would certainly never wish it to happen again. But it gave me a depth and an ability to just hold life's experiences more lightly that I did not have before. So, our challenge is to look for structures that help us integrate life's challenges. We also need structures that we can do on a daily basis and that help us successfully weather these problems. I think we need to be Teflon for difficulties and Velcro for things that nourish and sustain us. I think we need to be both. So maybe my title was kind of a teaser, Teflon or Velcro. Maybe it's Teflon and Velcro. We need to figure out a way to be more resistant to things that threaten to cling to us and weigh us down, and more Velcro for things that nourish us. Compassion, service, kindness, forgiveness. The experiences that teach us these principles, we need to hold on to and welcome them and nourish them and sustain them. One of life's important issues, well, back to Jung's quote, he says, the greatest and most important problems of life are fundamentally unsolvable. I don't think he's just talking about big tragedies. I think he's also talking about the issues that confront us every day, how we approach life. Because I think one of the most important points of life is not how we deal with tragedies, because that's obviously huge, but also just how we deal with the vicissitudes of life, how we approach life, whether we see instances in life as gifts or as additional problems. Our viewpoint of how we deal with the small stuff impacts our life just as much as how we deal with the big stuff, because the small stuff we get every day. How we deal with things that just stress us out on a daily basis. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he's about my age, maybe a little older, I don't know. And he was describing what he saw as a disturbing trend in his life. He said he just was not as nice as he used to be. He's more fearful, he's smaller, he just sees negativity in places where he did not see it before. His world is just getting smaller. Bit by bit, he's just hanging on to the negative stuff in his life, and what happens when that happens is he expects to see it where perhaps it is not. You know how that happens? We find evidence for our suppositions, even if it's not there, we just create it, it's what we see. That is what he's doing. If we don't, and we talked about it, and one of the things that we shared is if you don't make daily affirmative efforts to keep your heart open and to realize that you have the opportunity every day to connect with Spirit and have it sustain you and lighten you, your world may become smaller. How do they define darkness? Darkness is dark until there is a light. The light is the affirmative change that changes the darkness. Darkness is the default. Until we bring light to it, it remains dark. And that's kind of how joy works in our lives. Until we make affirmative efforts to remember that we are connected with Spirit, that we are of God, we have the risk of falling into that small, fearful state. Because life will just pile up on us. That's why we're here. It will just pile up. Unless we have a structure, a daily structure, to help us make sure that does not happen. Ken Kesey once said, this is another quote I like, Ken Kesey, this is how we make stuff up. He said, more suffering comes into the world by people taking offense than by people intending to give it. Isn't that true? Haven't you ever been in situations where somebody does something just kind of neutral toward you and you decide that it's a huge offense and you just kind of feed off it and it becomes bigger and bigger, and ultimately it may even color your relationship with that person, and it's just stuff that you have made up because of how we see the world and the negative bent that we sometimes bring to it. It's a cycle we need to be aware of. We need to bring our conscious awareness to it in order to break it. It's not who we are. Instead of walking through life with our heads down, we'd benefit better and more often if we could create a structure that gives us the space to remember, as Thomas Merton wrote, that we are all walking around shining like the sun. So then I started thinking about Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton was a Cistercian. He was a Trappist monk. Like the monastery down in Conyers, that is the Cistercian community. He lived a life that was dedicated to contemplation, community, prayer, and silence. That was the structure that informed his spiritual growth, which was profound. He's one of the deepest spiritual thinkers with the most impact in the last century. But he did it within that structure. Now, having said that, he also borrowed from other structures. He also visited the East and had a large Buddhist component in his practice in the later years of his life. But that doesn't mean he turned into a Buddhist. He used those practices and that learning to inform his own Cistercian path. Had he not had that path, I suspect that we would not have the writings from him that we have today. So the point of all this is sometimes when we, especially in communities like this, like One World, where we all have come from someplace. I did. I grew up as an Episcopal. And then I was a Methodist for a while, and then I, went into Unity, and, now I'm here. And all of you have a past that started you somewhere. And what I want to think about today, and what I want us to think about this week, and talk about on Wednesday for those who come on Wednesdays, is what has your structure been? How has it informed your journey, even if you no longer are in it, even if there are parts of it or all of it that you have rejected? How has it informed your faith journey and put you where you are today? And what does it mean for your future journey? So what I would encourage you to do is, this week there might be some homework. Just write some sentences on that. Think about your past. Think about your growing up. Think about what you did when you were a kid and you were coming up in a faith tradition. What was it? What was the structure that it imposed? And what did it give you that you can still use today? And what did you reject and why? Now this is not going to be graded. It's not like a dissertation, but just think about it. And bring it with you on Wednesday and let's talk about it. Because I feel that structure of some sort is important, and we create our own. And Joan Chittister created her own. That was her difference between religion and spirituality. She took the structure that she grew up in and created her own spiritual path. And that is our opportunity here at One World. And we have such a wonderful opportunity to do it because we draw on so many faith traditions. But let's just think about that. Just write a few sentences on what yours has been, what it meant to you, where it guides you in the future, what you have left behind and what you still take with you. One of the things Richard Rohr did in one of his writings is he came up with some ideas that help us fashion a structure. And I just want to mention a couple in closing, and we can think about them as well. One of the things he talked about was taking time in the silence. Meditation and prayer and just sitting in the silence. What happens then is that is an invitation for God to speak to you. You listen with what he calls the ears of the heart. It's almost one of those things. I read a story once about a guy who would go into a church and he'd come out 45 minutes later and people would say, "Joe, what are you doing in there?" And he says, "Well, I just go up to the front and I sit down and I say, God, this is Joe." And then I just listen and I hear back, "Okay, Joe, this is God." And then we just talk. And 45 minutes later I come out. And so you just give yourself the opportunity to listen with the ears of your heart to what Spirit is saying to you. So that's a time of just sitting in the silence. It can be prayer, it can be contemplative prayer, it can be whatever practice, it can be meditation, anything, it doesn't matter. He also talks about the importance of what he calls Sabbath, which is taking time off, not to sit in the silence just to rest, to renew and reconnect and find joy with whatever it is you like to do. Our lives are so busy, and you are looking at like the worst offender on the planet. But finding a Sabbath time to just rest and relax, you don't even have to call it that, and just reconnect and find that peace at your center. The other thing he talks about, and then I'll stop, I love this last one, is what he calls spiritual friend. There's a Celtic word called cara anna, and that is a soul friend. He talks about how on your spiritual path, it helps so much to have somebody who companions you. And it's not a spouse, it's not somebody you pay. It's somebody who just is your soul friend, who helps you over tough times, who listens to you in trouble, who points out where you might not be noticing the presence of God in your life. You know, we are so encouraged to go it alone because we're all cowboys here. You know, this is the United States. We do it ourselves. We need community. We need companionship. We all need that soul friend who walks with us. So just think about that. Think if you have one in your life. Think if you would benefit from one. It is a wonderful relationship, a wonderfully supportive and giving and loving relationship to have. And that might be the only the only thing that person is to you. But just think about it. It is a benefit to you on your spiritual life. I think Joan Chittister writes, if you do not, this was either her or Richard Rohr, I think it was her, If you do not have someone to guide you, to hold on to you during the times of not knowing, you will normally stay at your present level of growth. Seek out a sacred companion you can trust to be honest and present to your journey, who can reflect back to you God's presence in your world and in your life. What a gift that is to get and to give. So those are my thoughts for today. Let's just think about the structures that have helped us, the structure that we can build now as individuals and perhaps as community to help us as we walk our faith journey. You know, people ask, what is my goal here at One World? And my goal every week is to figure out how when you walk out that door, you feel closer to God. And I think this is one way to do it. So let's bring these thoughts in.